Hi! In this video I'm going to be talking about securities, which are the types of investments you can actually make. So as you can see in this slide, securities are really just certificates showing that you own a company or have lent it money. It's a bit of an old-fashioned term, but it's still used today. And you can see, based off the two pillars that I've talked about in a previous video, debt and equity, you have different types of securities for each, different types of certificates for each. So on the debt side, when you're lending money to a company or also a government, you have loans, bonds, and notes. And they all mean the same thing, very confusingly. That's part of what makes the financial world so confusing. All these same words that mean the same thing. And all of those, you're lending money and you're getting interest, and that's why you invest in that way. And that's a particular type of group of securities. Then you have on the equity side, where you're owning a share of the company, you have stocks and shares, and they're usually the best known types of investments. And from a stock or a share, which again mean the exact same thing, you are entitled to a dividend and or distribution, again mean the same thing, and you're also entitled to capital growth, and we've been through those in previous videos. So to make it a bit more clear, I'm going to go through the particular examples of how you can invest in equity, and that's when you're investing in a company, and the life cycle of a company and which different areas you might fit in as an investor. So this slide shows the 5 main stages of which you can invest in a company. So we start with the most basic, which is friends or family. So you can, a friend can come up to you and say, well, I've got an idea, will you invest in it? And you say, well, why not? I really back this person, so you invest in them and you get a share in their company. Then the next thing is you can, along the same lines, you can inherit some shares maybe in a family company. And usually, not always, but usually these companies will be relatively small. Then the next side is, the next step is crowdfunding. So crowdfunding is usually for pretty early stage investments, small ventures, new companies, maybe new ideas, and they're not able to raise loads of money, but they go out and ask as many people as possible to donate them or invest just small amounts of money in them. Then the next stage you have is venture capital. And this may or may not be a familiar term to you, but it's the thing that's practiced a lot in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco. So what that is people investing in very relatively early stage companies that have obviously their past friends and family and past crowdfunding, but they're usually maybe in the tech scene. People investing them, you think that they're going to be the next big Uber or big Facebook. So that's venture capital. So it's not completely early stage, but it's still pretty early, and you're taking a punt, and you obviously have high rewards if you get it right. Then the next step along is private equity, and maybe compared to the angels of venture capital, as they're referred to, who invest, the private equity are more of the demon side of things. They're the suits who go in and they buy companies that are relatively advanced, and then they create what's called a portfolio, which is a group of companies that might be in similar industries. So they might buy 5, well, to use my example as always, bicycle companies, and merge them together and then sell them off again. So they're more like investment banks, and they're less involved in investing in the company for the long term, but more playing around with it. Then the next stage, which is the most advanced stage, is the stock market, and those are for companies who have usually been through those other 4 steps, and they're so big that they're ready to get the public involved to be able to buy them. And as an investor, it's most likely that you'll be investing in this space. So as you can see, that's early stage to late stage. It also corresponds with more risk the earlier stage you are, because it's an unproved business, to less risk as you go on. And just to solidify this, an example can be useful. So say something like Facebook. If you wanted to invest in Facebook at the very beginning, well, first you'd have to be a friend of Mark Zuckerberg, maybe a family member. I don't know how close he was with his family, but you could approach him and buy some shares maybe at this time. And it was just an idea when he was in his student halls. Then the next thing is he might have wanted to raise some money quickly, so he put his concept of Facebook out onto the university crowdfunding website, say, and again, you could have invested at that time. Then the next thing, it got a bit bigger, so he went out to speak to these guys in San Francisco, the angels, to try and get them to invest, and that would be the next step. And then obviously we get to the next stage, private equity. Facebook's a bit bigger, you could invest at that time. This is more the suits, obviously, and then eventually they go into the stock market, and now anyone can invest, but you can't really go up to Mark Zuckerberg personally and invest, but instead you can invest through the stock market. And that's generally the life cycle of a company like Facebook. So then on the debt side of things, you have really more different types of lending. So the first thing you can do is lend to, say, family or friends. So maybe you've done that before, you lend some money to a friend, maybe you charge them interest, depends how big a shopper they are, I guess, and whether you're guaranteed you'll get the money back. And then you can do the same thing to family. So that's obviously a very basic style of lending money. Then the next stage you have is corporate bonds, and corporate really just means a corporation, which is a company, and so these are companies that are borrowing money. And we looked at an example of Philips the other day. When they want to raise money, instead of going to the stock market, they issue what are called bonds, and they can be bought. And obviously, because this corporate bonds captures the whole life cycle of a company, there's less of a stage issue in debt. You know, where we talked about the different stages in equity, in debt, it's all really just within these corporate bonds. Then the next thing is bank savings. So every time you put money in the bank, whoever the bank is that you have your savings account in, you're essentially lending them money, because they then use that money to invest themselves, and they should give you a return. At the moment, as we've spoken about in the past, returns are pretty much zero, so you don't get much of an interest, but again, that is a form of lending and investing. Then the fourth is lending money to the government, and this is, again, in this case we go from the more risk to the less risk. This is the least risky thing you can do, because government's obviously enormous, and they're pretty safe bets that they're going to be able to pay their money back that they've borrowed with interest. And thank you very much for watching the video.